Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Minnesota Matters. I'm Tess Rice. I'm MBA's General Counsel. With me are Teresa Kuvas, MBA's Senior Government Relations Manager, and Tom Boswell-Healy, Associate Counsel and Compliance Consultant. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on MBA's YouTube channel if you want to watch it again. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Teresa's going to kick it off today with a recap of the recent primaries, and then Tom and I are going to talk about Minnesota's new law allowing the sale of edibles with THC. Teresa?
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. As you know, the last time we talked, it was right after the legislative session, and I think there was a hope that there would be a special session since there was so much still on the line with a budget surplus and bonding bills and just a lot of other issues outstanding, but they never came to a compromise, and therefore there was no special session. There will not be a special session. They will just look towards the election in November and then into January when the new legislative session starts. I'm going to actually share my screen and we'll talk a little bit about the primary from last week, and then also go into kind of looking forward to the elections in November, and then also into 2023. So instead of me just talking overall, I figured I would give you a slideshow today, so all these names and numbers and everything aren't just kind of coming at you from me talking. So let's see if I can figure this out. There we go. So last week, there was a special election in CD1. So that is the southernmost part of the state. If you remember, Congressman Hagedorn passed away back in February, opening up that seat. There was a primary in May, and then the special general was last Tuesday. Brad Finstead, now Congressman Finstead, beat Jeff Ettinger with a 51-47 margin. So he'll serve through the rest of this year, and then he will have another race against Ettinger again in November for the full 2-year term. This is an interesting one because because this was a very Trump heavy district, and I think a 51-47 was closer than some people would have liked, but I think Finstead still beat Hagedorn's numbers from 2 years ago, but I have not gone back to look at that. So it was a nice win for Finstead. I think both candidates would have been great for the district. We have known Finstead for years, through his years when he was a legislator in the House back probably decade and a half ago now. Not only did he have the race against Ettinger to fulfill Congressman Hagedorn's seat, he also had a primary, which was a very confusing for a lot of people that lived in the first, because if you were on the front side of the ballot was the primary for November, but on the back side was the special general. So people had to flip it over in order to vote for Finstead twice. So he was sworn into office last Friday on August 12th. You did not actually have to have the results certified. They was able to get sworn in. So he was able to take his first vote last Friday. Another primary that a lot of people were watching in the state was in CD5, which is Minneapolis. That is the Ilhan Omar seat. She had if you remember 2 years ago, she had a close enough race. This one was obviously significantly closer with 2,500 votes. If you look at the turnout was significantly less this year than 2 years ago. Omar got significantly more votes 2 years ago, but again, every midterm is different. It really depends on what's on the ballot. There were fewer contested primaries for DFLers on the ballot, so it's less to bring people out for. You have to get really hyped up to want to go and vote in August, and not as many people were doing the early voting, which is what happened 2 years ago during COVID. A lot of people were getting in early, whether it was mailing it in or actually just going in early to vote. But this should be a wake-up call for Omar that that her seat is not completely safe in a primary. I'm not quite sure if that will be a wake-up call for her, but that remains to be seen. We'll obviously find out in 2 years when she's back on for another primary. So this is this page actually looks at kind of overall what the congressional makeup looks like for the state and who is running in the various districts. Redistricting back in February didn't drastically change these districts. I foresee that all of these incumbents, which are the highlighted bolded ones, will win re-election. So Minnesota will likely remain a 4-4 Republican Democratic state when it comes to our congressional makeup. So again, this is kind of what it looks like. I didn't put some of the third-party candidates on there. Third party could play in the congressional district too, in the Angie Craig Kistner race. But that's probably the only one that I foresee a third party contender possibly having some sway in that district. We also have the statewide candidates on the ballot in November. We have Walz and Jensen, and then Ellison and Schultz for AG. The AG's race was the one that was most contested on the Republican side. Doug Wardlow, who had lost the endorsement back in May to Schultz for the GOP endorsement, decided to not abide by the endorsement and run in the primary. Wardlow did run against Ellison 4 years ago, and in a race that a lot of people believed Ellison could have and should have lost, Wardlow did not beat him. So I think that was a lot of deciding factors for a lot of Republicans that went out to vote in the AG's primary, was that Wardlow proved 4 years ago that he couldn't beat Ellison. So if a Republican is to beat Ellison, it needs to be somebody different. And so we'll see if Schultz is able to do that. The Walz Jensen race, I think that one will start heating up. We'll see what debates kind of come out of that one. It sounds like there will not be a state fair debate, which has kind of been the norm over the tradition. So they will not be debating there. I don't think the AGs will be debating there. I know the auditor, Julie Blaha and Ryan Wilson, have agreed to debate out at the state fair. I don't know that Simon and Crockett will. So I just kind of put on the bottom, the last Republican to win statewide election was Governor Pawlenty back in 2006, and he still didn't get 50%. So for Republicans, statewide is really difficult. They do really well in greater Minnesota, but that metro area remains to be a challenge for Republicans. So here's the current makeup of the legislature. We have the Senate is a 34-31-2, and the House is 70-64. The two for the independents in the Senate, neither of them are running. Sadly, Senator Tomassoni passed away last week. He has been sick for the last couple of years, and he passed away. So that seat will not need to be filled in a special, but both of those independent seats, Senator Bach and Senator Tomassoni's seats, are up on the iron range and are thought to be pickups for Republicans. So that is something that we will continue to watch, obviously. And then it's a small change in the House majority as well if the Republicans are to take over. Predictions looked that the Senate will stay GOP. The House could go either way. But I think it'll be tough to beat Walz this year. Jensen's going to have to do a lot of work to get to some of those voters. So we could have either a split legislature again, or a Republican legislature and a Democratic governor again, but again, November is still a ways away. We had 51 retirements not coming back to St. Paul. Some of those were retirements, some lost in primaries, and some are running for county commissioners and city councils. 10 House representatives are running for the Senate, 1 Senate Democrat running for the House. A bunch of legislative primaries last week. One of the ones that we were watching significantly was a seat against Elkins and Carlson, both Democrats, both from Bloomington, got paired together, both sat on the Commerce Committee. Representative Elkins won that seat. He's been focused on privacy and also on housing affordability. We've worked well with him. We'll continue to work with him. It sounds like he wants to work on privacy again next year. That obviously hasn't passed anywhere yet. And then in Egan, we had two sitting legislators also paired up, and Liz Ryer beat Sandy Mason. Ryer was a freshman, and Sandy Mason was a very long-term sitting representative from Egan. These two from the DFL primaries, Erin May Quaid was not endorsed. She was a former representative. She beat Justin Emmerich. I note this one because she lost the endorsement only because she withdrew after going into labor, and the endorsing convention continued on. She was very pointed as to who she door knocked and got out to vote that day. Thompson lost to Liz Lee. Thompson has been in the news quite a bit for various comments he's made to police and on the floor. So that one was a huge loss for him, 90-10. A lot more primaries on the Republican side. The Senate, there was a lot of challenges to the Senate Republicans. Action for Liberty is a group out there right now. They tend to run considerably right to Republicans, and they took on a handful of sitting GOP senators, especially Senator Pratt down in Prior Lake. All of the incumbent senators won their primaries, the closest being Eric Pratt. And this was one, obviously, we really wanted him to win because he has been a champion for the banking industry. He's been an author for a lot of our bills, banker in his previous life. So that's definitely one that we wanted to see win. But back to where, what that kind of really means is that the Senate GOP will definitely have a more conservative caucus next session. The majority leader, if he remains majority leader, will have to run a tighter ship for that caucus, as they will be considerably conservative. A lot of the House Republicans, there was a new Republican caucus that kind of broke apart from the Republican caucus in the House. All of those members are now running for the Senate or aren't winning. They are projected to win. So Kurt Dowd kind of looks at them going to the Senate, that he won't have them in his caucus, but he does have a couple that will be some kind of more the new Republican Action for Liberty group that will be coming into his caucus as well. So they will just have to continue to see how to govern with the various makeups of these of the new legislators that do come in. Third-party candidate impact. This is one that I put on here just because we've seen a lot of marijuana candidates over the years. They've played in some districts. I mentioned it in the 2nd Congressional District. That could definitely play. It played down in Shakopee 2 years ago. The Democrat lost due to the marijuana candidate being on the ballot, and the same candidate's on the ballot again this time. We'll see if that happens. It did happen. It happened in the Austin Albert Lee 2 years ago as well. So we'll watch that one. It's interesting to see how they play into these races as well. The voting issues, public safety is still number one. The economy, inflation, gas prices, education. Social issues, kind of the Supreme Court's decision. We'll see how that plays in Minnesota. Obviously we saw it play. It was a big issue on the ballot in Kansas a couple of weeks ago. I think it's one of those issues that a lot of people don't kind of really know with polling, if people talk about it or not. There's nothing specific on our ballot that brings up the abortion issue, the pro-choice, pro-life issue, but that doesn't mean that people don't still go out to vote on it, especially if you look at, what could end up happening statewide and with the various majorities and how that looks moving forward. So we just kind of note that as to when we look at how the elections will play out. Just kind of some of the dates looking ahead. Early balloting starts on September 23rd. So these are some of the dates to know. And then just kind of looking ahead, the legislature begins on January 3rd of 2023. If the House and Senate majorities shift at all, there'll be there'll be changes everywhere. We will have 60 plus new legislators to educate next session. And we will meet with anybody that will meet with us. It'll be a budget year. There will likely still be a big surplus. Will it be a bonding bill? Didn't get done in 2022. And then public safety will definitely be on there. So we'll continue. We'll send up political insights over the next couple months. If anybody has any questions about specific issues, candidates, feel free to to reach out to me and we can talk about it. I will be spending the next couple of months meeting with candidates and legislators, kind of hearing kind of how they're going to win and their thoughts on the legislature in general. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Teresa. So we're going to transition now to Minnesota's new law allowing the sale of edibles with THC derived from hemp. The law was effective July 1st, and we did put out a couple legal compliance bulletins on that issue. If you haven't seen those, you can subscribe to our legal compliance bulletins for free on our website. The passage of this law was a surprise to almost everyone. Medical marijuana has been legal here since 2014. But Senate Republicans have been crystal clear that they were not interested in legalizing recreational marijuana. And then the House, the DFL-controlled House, has been very interested in legalizing it. So we were pretty secure that it wasn't going to happen. But there was a bill introduced by Representative Adelson in February, and it was heard by the Commerce and Finance Committees in March without much attention really being garnered at all. And I watched those hearings after the fact. And while the bill would legalize THC edibles, wasn't hidden from the committee members, it really wasn't made a big deal out of either. This was sold as a way to regulate the sale of edibles with Delta 8, which was completely unregulated and was being sold without restriction. So it was very important to do something about that. For those that don't know, Delta 8 is one of over 100 cannabinoids. I had to look at how to pronounce that. Cannabinoids produced naturally by the cannabis plant, but it isn't found in significant amounts. So concentrated amounts of Delta 8 are typically manufactured from hemp-derived cannabidiol CBD. A recent court case, it made it clear that Delta 8 couldn't be regulated under current statute because the statute actually mentioned Delta 9 specifically. And so it did not cover Delta 8. And so there really was an urgency to do something. So Representative Adelson's bill ended up being part of a 337-page Health and Human Services omnibus bill that passed the House in early April. In the final days of the legislative session in May, a bipartisan panel was negotiating the differences between the House bill, the House omnibus bill, and the Senate omnibus bill. And they had hundreds of pages to get through and a lot of amendments to look at, and including one that exempted cannabinoids derived from hemp from Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Schedule. So basically legalizing THC. I wanted to show you the vote that was on this bill. I mean, this vote is what allowed this to become law, and you can get an idea of the confusion when they voted on us. So this video is going to show the co-chairs of the bipartisan panel taking the vote on the language that would legalize the THC edibles. I'm going to share my screen here. So here they are, the co-chairs.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's adopted.
And then I would move House Article 22, Sections 1, 3 through 9, and 11 as amended.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That doesn't legalize marijuana. We just didn't do that, did we? Okay.
Oh, are you kidding? Of course you have. No,
It's all in the fine
just
print.
kidding.
Okay.
Just kidding. Next, we'll do that next.
So there you go. There they are. They legalized it, which was incredible. Certainly some members didn't know what they were voting for. House Democrats admitted that they tried to keep the issue quiet to increase the likelihood of it passing. It was even kept quiet after it passed. The day after it was signed by the governor, I reviewed the language and I said to Teresa, I think they passed like a recreational marijuana light. And knowing the Senate's position on cannabis, it was kind of unbelievable. So we reached out to our contract lobbyists who had followed this bill in the Health and Human Services Committee, and they said, no, this bill just regulates Delta 8. It was another month before they got back to us and said, oh, I guess you were right. And these people are very clued into what's going on. So that kind of gives you an idea of how much confusion there was. Senator Abler has expressed a desire to revisit the issue, but Senate Majority Leader Jeremy Miller said he was aware of the language and that he thinks the law should be given a chance to work. So it's very unlikely to be changed, except to provide a more comprehensive regulatory scheme. I'm going to share my screen one more time because I heard that yesterday that Senator Abler's face is being used on some of the packaging for edibles, which is kind of funny, I guess. Hopefully you can see this. Oh, I guess I'm pretty bad at this. Never mind. Anyway, there's edibles being sold with Senator Abler's face on them, which can't make him very happy. Part of the passing the bill quietly meant that it was a short bill without a lot of changes to existing law, so it doesn't attract a lot of attention. But this, of course, meant that a lot of details weren't covered. Taxation wasn't covered, though sales tax probably does apply. Licensing wasn't covered either, so a business doesn't even have to be licensed to sell edibles with THC derived from hemp. The Board of Pharmacy is supposed to regulate it. The problem is that the board has 23 employees, so they don't really have the staff to regulate it. Plus, because there was no taxation or funding in the bill to support their regulation, they don't really have the resources. They also don't have a lab to test the products. So as a result of the lack of regulation, cities have had to step in to bridge the gap. I found 12 cities that have passed a one-year moratorium prohibiting the sale, and there are probably more. I think every city is probably considering at least some kind of moratorium or regulation at this point, at least until the legislature passes more comprehensive language or they develop their own taxation and licensing scheme. Cities can only have a one-year moratorium on law, so they need to figure out what they're going to do during that one-year time. So let's talk about the details of the law. So it's permissible to sell food and drinks in Minnesota to people 21 and over that contain hemp-derived THC in concentrations of up to 5 milligrams per serving or 50 milligrams per package. And this includes both Delta 9 and Delta 8 THC. The edible cannabinoid products can't bear any likeness to cartoon characters, animals, or fruits that appeal to children, be modeled on products geared toward children, be applied to commercially available snacks or candy. They can't be packaged to resemble commercially available foods or be marked in a way that could reasonably mislead a person into believing that it contains anything besides an edible cannabinoid product. There are also various packaging requirements such as child resistant and opaque, and labeling requirements such as keep this product out of the reach of children. So the Minnesota Board of Pharmacy has the authority to make sure that these THC edibles comply with state law. If a product doesn't meet all the law's requirements, it may be considered a misdemeanor to sell it. The Board of Pharmacy has a form to file complaints against unlicensed cannabis businesses or licensed cannabis businesses that are selling it. So that's probably the way that they'll get that kind of information. And they have also put out an inspection checklist to assist law enforcement. Because the new law limits the sale to persons over the age of 21, to sell to an underage person is also a misdemeanor level crime. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Tom now to talk about how this law impacts banks in particular. Tom?
All right, good morning, everybody. Well, I'm going to start off just with the Q&A question here from Teresa Johnson, asking whether the new THC edible and beverages legalization in Minnesota still meets the legal guidelines federally. In my opinion, it does. The intent of the statute was to stay within that federal framework. So anything that has the same limit for what's hemp as opposed to marijuana, the 0.3% of THC. So as long as that requirement is met, it's going to be hemp and not marijuana. So it's not, those retailers aren't going to trigger a continuous SAR filing just due to the fact that they're selling now the hemp-derived edibles or beverages themselves. As far as what I've seen so far of banks doing, I haven't seen banks do too much change in their process, but from a Bank Secrecy Act perspective, It's going to be something where they should be looked at least initially as higher risk. You do some additional monitoring to make sure their activities are within the scope of the law. And with that, I hopefully shared a little checklist in the chat, just a Word document about going out to either an on-site visit or sending questions to those retailers that are involved in the hemp-derived THC products. And it really just goes through, a lot of it is talking about the labeling, but then also the age requirements that Tess mentioned. But, so the retailers, I would view them similar to money service business or an independent owned ATM operator. The same thing, we just have to get a little more information as their activities to make sure they're doing everything in line with state law. Kind of one thing that's similar, going back to Teresa's questions with the whether or not to file a continuing activity SAR. Some of you may have run into a situation with independent ATM owners. There must be licensed in the state of Minnesota. Some of there aren't. If they are not, technically, then they are violating the state statute, and it would be something that would trigger a continuing activity SAR. I haven't seen examiners push on that too much, but it certainly brought up the issue up to bankers, and that they should be notifying those independent ATM operators that there is a licensing requirement and that they should be licensed. There's an annual fee that is not too high, but is there. So in a similar way, those hemp-derived THC retailers, they need to be adhering to the requirements in the new law. And if they're not, then they're operating in violation of the state statute, and that would be something that would trigger the continuing activity SAR, or at least to review that. There can be some time frame there as the banks notify those customers that to ensure that they know what they're supposed to be doing and that they have a process to do that. So the little checklist that I shared, hopefully everybody has access to now. It goes through some of those requirements. We're talking about the packaging and the labeling, and who is eligible to purchase it. So anybody 21 and over. And those are the big things. It could be, depending on how many of these customers that you have, and maybe something where you want to go out and actually visit on site and inspect the packaging yourself to make sure that they're doing that. And there could be additional requirements too. If the retailer is not just a retailer, but also a manufacturer, then they would have actual licensing requirements with the state to make sure that they're a licensed manufacturer of hemp or producer. And there may be some, certainly more in the outstate area, that grow the product as well as manufacture products as well. One thing too to watch out for if you're going to visit is the type of products involved. These do need to be prepackaged products, so it can't be something where you're adding a hemp-derived product to an existing product. So Tess and I were just discussing about that. If you have a microbrewery or something like that, that's selling draft beer and other beverages, it can't be the fact where they have a vial of their THC and that they add to a beer or anything like that. That's not something that's covered by this law as legal. And they can develop their own beverage. It shouldn't be mixed with alcohol itself. They would need to get a federal approval for that, for the manufacturer of something along those lines that mixes the two. Those are kind of the big things. So the most important takeaways there are just to make sure that you know what retailers are involved in it. There's obviously going to be different levels. If you have a retailer that's sells a large quantity of this or specializes in hemp-derived products, that's going to be a higher risk retailer than someone like a convenience store where they may have just a small product display that's in among all their other items that they sell. And certainly if it's not a large part of their revenue, it's going to be a lower risk item, but it's still important to know what activities they're engaged in and to what extent. And that's That's kind of the basic thing. So the big caution there, again, if they're not adhering to the state statute, then I do think it does trigger the continuing activity SAR responsibility. I think that's what I had to say.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I think is there a new question in there, Tom?
Yeah, so just looking at that from
Okay.
Diana, Pine Country Bank. It says you reference going to the business and checking labels. If there's no government level monitoring or licensing happening now, how can we as bankers tell the businesses they're in violation and discontinue services? Maybe I misunderstood. Well, whether or not you discontinue services, that's going to be a banking decision, business decision by the bank. Whether you want to discontinue service, you can still provide service. That it would just be triggering a continuing activity SAR if they're not adhering to the labeling requirements. But as far as the enforcement of the law, that is the duty of law enforcement. So it's not the duty of the bank. Just as far as your own responsibilities is just to determine that they're actually operating legally. And if you know that they're not operating legally, that's where the SAR continuing activity comes into.
Yeah, and I really do think it's likely that law enforcement will become involved in this. Just from talking to our own local law enforcement where I live, they're very concerned about it. So I just wouldn't be surprised if they do take this checklist and make these visits. So I think it's good for your customers to know that they should be prepared for that.
Yeah, as I said, it's kind of similar to that independent ATM operator. So the bank doesn't have any sort of law enforcement, authority as far as that goes, but notifying those customers engaged in that activity that there is the licensing requirements, and there's certain requirements they have to meet. It's the same thing with those hemp retailers. They have those primarily packaging and who can purchase requirements that they have to adhere to. And if they don't, then it triggers banks' obligations, not necessarily customers. But you can always make the decision to discontinue offering the banking services if that's what you decide to do.
Thanks, Tom. There was a question about the recording. That goes on our YouTube channel. I don't know, Renee, if you want to tell them how to find the YouTube channel, but I assume you go to YouTube and Google us and you'll find it, but it'll go live on Monday, according to Renee. So that's where it will be. If you have any trouble, just reach out to us in the legal department and we can help you with that. As I hope you know, we are here to answer your questions. So if you want to give us a call ever or email us at legal@minbankers.com, we can try to help you out. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Have a great day. Bye.